I fully appreciate how hard things are. And I understand too that I have work to do to restore trust after all that has happened.
Rishi Sunak enters number 10, setting the tone for his premiership and trying to distance himself from the actions of his predecessors. He's the youngest Prime Minister in 200 years, the first British Asian to achieve the highest office, and he's already the second Prime Minister of the King's reign. Among the new appointments, Dominic Raab is back as Deputy Prime Minister. Suella Braverman is back at the Home Office, despite having broken the ministerial code last week. And Michael Gove is back 3 months after he was sacked by Boris Johnson.
The dilemmas of government are instant. Who to hire, who to fire, as Rishi Sunak attempts to build a team that can last, that his party can support.
Yes, we'll have the latest on the new cabinet and on the immediate challenges for Mr Sunak. He says the UK is facing a profound economic crisis as the cost of living affects more and more people. With budget food prices rocketing to new levels, voters say they're very concerned.
You can see it on the shelves when you go into the supermarkets. You've got to really think about making better choices.
Ultimately, the cost needs to come down, or people's income needs to go up.
And as the UK sees its third Prime Minister of 2022, we'll be talking to people in Nottinghamshire about their hopes for the year ahead.
And later on BBC London, as a new Prime Minister takes over, Londoners face rising food bills, with basic ranges going up the most.
Good evening. Britain's new Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, has moved into number 10. He spent most of the day appointing senior members of the government. On arriving in Downing Street this morning, he said the UK was facing a profound economic crisis, and he made a point of saying that he would need to repair the damage caused by some of the policies of his predecessor, Liz Truss. The top cabinet appointments announced today, they're being scrutinised very closely for what they say about Mr Sunak's priorities. Let's take a look. Jeremy Hunt is staying on as Chancellor. He was appointed just a few weeks ago after that failed mini-budget. James Cleverly here, well, he's staying at the Foreign Office, despite supporting Boris Johnson for the leadership. And Suella Braverman, who resigned days ago after breaking the ministerial code, well, she is back in the same job as Home Secretary, a decision that has drawn heavy criticism from the opposition. Also in the new team, let's just take a quick look at these. Dominic Raab at the far end there, Deputy Prime Minister and Justice Secretary. Michael Gove is returning to Cabinet as Levelling Up Secretary just a few months after he was sacked by Boris Johnson. And Penny Mordaunt here is staying on as Leader of the House of Commons. She was, of course, a leadership contender this time, and it is being widely reported that she was expecting promotion to a more senior post. Tonight we'll have the latest on the new appointments and on the immediate challenges for the Sunak government. We'll start with the story of a quite remarkable day with our political editor, Chris Mason.
10 to 12 this morning, Downing Street's security gates had swung open, the motorcade swept in, heralding another new arrival here.
Here he comes, Rishi Sunak, walking up Downing Street alone to the podium to address the country for the first time as Prime Minister.
I've just been to Buckingham Palace and accepted His Majesty the King's invitation to form a government in his name. It is only right to explain why I am standing here as your new Prime Minister. Right now, our country is facing a profound economic crisis.
A business-like, sober tone, a blunt, direct assessment of the country's predicament and future.
I want to pay tribute to my predecessor, Liz Truss. She was not wrong to want to improve growth in this country, but some mistakes were made. And I have been elected as leader of my party and your Prime Minister, in part, to fix them. This will mean difficult decisions to come.
Translation: spending cuts and/or tax rises appear likely. And here's why the new Prime Minister doesn't think there needs to be a general election. The Conservatives won the last one, he said, not Boris Johnson.
The mandate my party earned in 2019 is not the sole property of any one individual.
He concluded by addressing the political crisis that has raged in recent weeks.
I understand too that I have work to do to restore trust after all that has happened. All I can say is that I am not daunted. We will create a future worthy of the sacrifices so many have made, and fill tomorrow and every day thereafter with hope. Thank you.
The era, or at least stint, of Rishi Sunak begins. An extraordinary moment. He was plunged into the political wilderness just weeks ago, and now he is Prime Minister. His task, colossal. The photographers shouted at the Prime Minister, asking for a smile.
Cheer up, Rishi!
He pretty much resisted. Before the day's big moment, the now familiar choreography of a day with two Prime Ministers, one out ahead of the other in. Not every moment is riveting. Oh, and if you've ever wondered what political failure looks like, this is it. A removal van turning up in Downing Street.
It's our old friend, the lectern. We've seen rather a lot of it in recent weeks. Here it comes back out into the street again for Liz Truss's goodbye speech.
The outgoing Prime Minister's closest colleagues gather, her deputy Therese Coffey turning photographer.
Oh, here we go. Here she comes.
Accompanying her and watching from the pavement, her husband and daughters.
It has been a huge honour to be Prime Minister of this great country. In just a short period, this government has acted urgently and decisively on the side of hard-working families and businesses.
Liz Truss brought defiance, not apology, and an instinct her defining aim was right.
From my time as Prime Minister, I am more convinced than ever that we need to be bold. We simply cannot afford to be a low-growth country where the government takes up an increasing share of our national wealth. Our country continues to battle through a storm. But I believe in Britain. I believe in the British people. And I know that brighter days lie ahead. Thank you.
A Prime Minister departs just 7 weeks after she arrived. This moment capturing the unprecedented turbulence that has gripped British politics and captured international attention for all the wrong reasons.
Moments later, her final act as Prime Minister, a trip to Buckingham Palace to resign. The King would later ask Rishi Sunak to form a government, this photo confirming him as our new Prime Minister.
We've had 12 years now of Conservative failure, and we're now on to our third Conservative Prime Minister in 3 months. They don't have a mandate to govern. Rishi Sunak himself has no mandate.
The real problem we have, this isn't one Prime Minister changing during the lifetime of a Parliament. This is the third Prime Minister in the space of 2 months.
Rishi Sunak has asked today for the British people to trust him. Yet the Conservatives won't put their trust in the British people by giving them a say in a general election. People are worried sick out there. There are millions of struggling families and pensioners. They need more help.
Tonight, the new cabinet has taken shape. Jeremy Hunt remains as Chancellor.
Are you pleased, Mr. Cleverly?
James Cleverly remains as Foreign Secretary. Dominic Raab is back in 2 jobs he's done before, Deputy Prime Minister and Justice Secretary. And talk of returning to an old patch, Michael Gove is back as Levelling Up Secretary.
You happy to be back as Home Secretary?
The most eye-catching appointment is Suella Braverman.
Just last Wednesday, she was out as Home Secretary. 6 days later, she's back as Home Secretary. Rishi Sunak is in number 10, the first big decisions of his premiership taken. There'll be plenty more where they came from.
Well, let's rejoin Chris again in Downing Street. Chris, can I start straight away with possibly the most controversial appointment, that is Suella Braverman. You said it was eye-catching. Some Labour people would have stronger words than that. I'm wondering where you think that appointment lies within the context of this cabinet.
Huw, I think it's the first flashpoint, really, that this new government will encounter. I think we can expect Labour to pick it up as a point of contention to argue over in the coming days. Why? Well, simply because, firstly, the astonishing nature of the revolving door at the Home Office, that this time last week Suella Braverman was the Home Secretary. Right now she is the Home Secretary, but between those 2 points, she was out of the Home Office, with the previous Prime Minister telling her she had broken the ministerial code twice, and yet, a matter of days later, she is back in. Now, there's some concern on the Conservative backbenches, some saying, look, if Rishi Sunak is going to make a great play for integrity, then how does he square that with such a rapid reappointment of Suella Braverman? Labour, I suspect, will make a similar argument and try and press for direct answers from the Prime Minister.
Well, that's one appointment there, Chris. Just let's look at the broader picture and the way that the other appointments have been made. What are you reading into the general shape of this cabinet?
I think what we have here is an attempt from the Prime Minister to cast as broadly as he can within the Conservative family, the greatest range, if you like, of shades of blue. And I think to an extent that explains his desire to bring Suella Braverman, a flag bearer on the right of the party, back into the tent. It also explains, you mentioned this a few moments ago, James Cleverly staying as Foreign Secretary. As recently as Sunday afternoon, he wanted Boris Johnson to be the next Prime Minister, not Rishi Sunak. So I think what he is attempting to do, the new Prime Minister, is learn a key lesson that critics of his predecessor feel that she ignored, which is that sense that if you build a government too much in your own image and freeze out those within your party who might not share your entire philosophy, that spells trouble. And this matters because stability for Rishi Sunak is a basic building block of being able to govern. It's not enough to govern successfully, but it's necessary to even start the process.
Chris, we'll talk again later. Thanks for now. Chris Mason there, our political editor in Downing Street. Well, in that statement in Downing Street earlier, Rishi Sunak promised to unite all parts, not with words, he said, but with action. But to what extent did that message and the promises made impress voters? Our political correspondent Alex Forsyth has been to the constituency of Bassetlaw in Nottinghamshire, a Labour stronghold from 1929 until 2019, when the seat went from red to blue.
The economic picture feels pretty scary for many right now. In Worksop, these friends meet for coffee when they can. All three understand struggle. All three are sceptical when politicians promise solutions. Dina said the new Prime Minister should visit her church to see those they're having to help.
They are working people as well as those on benefits, having to come for food and clothes now as well, and furniture and pots and pans. He has money, so he's all right. But I'd like him to see what it's like for those that aren't.
Alison cares for the elderly in a sector she says is underpaid and overworked.
We're struggling really badly.
How do you feel about Rishi Sunak?
I would have liked to have seen a general election. He was thrust upon us. I've always been Conservative, always, but we're just going from one to the other.
For Sharon, rising bills means juggling work and looking after her granddaughter.
It's very worrying. They all make promises. Sometimes they keep some, sometimes they don't. Sometimes they make a complete hash of it. You know what I'm talking about.
I've just been to Buckingham Palace.
This Prime Minister promised to fix the mistakes, but here, talk of tough economic choices does cause concern.
Last time we went through austerity, it was the working class that paid. And, if he comes to the working class to pay again, we haven't got it.
What did you think?
Big words. Let's see some big actions.
The proof is in the pudding.
with warnings of tight finances and no easy fixes. At this transport and logistics company, they want decisions that mean stability. Here, they repurpose old tyres for the renewable sector, so staff understand giving things another chance, even another Prime Minister.
During COVID, he was decisive and his plans were definitive, and I think he needs to carry out that thought process again.
He needs to let the people feel unafraid to put the heating on and worry about losing their house. He needs to keep his focus on levelling up in the north.
What did you make of his message about the economy and the choices the government might have to make?
He's telling us what we already know. How is he going to do that? Words are good, and his words were good, but I'd like to see the plan of how he's going to deliver that.
It will take some heavy lifting to offer real reassurance, particularly given the economic burden that's already causing strain for so many. Alex Forsyth, BBC News, Worksop.
Well, it's probably obvious already, but there is no settling in period for Rishi Sunak. If you look at the diary, it is packed with important events from the word go. If you start tomorrow, for example, his first Prime Minister's questions in the House of Commons, where he'll be facing the Labour leader, Sir Keir Starmer, whose party, of course, is currently enjoying a strong lead in the opinion polls. If we look ahead to Friday, well, that's the deadline for new elections to be called in Northern Ireland, unless the Democratic Unionists there agree to resume their places in the power-sharing agreement at Stormont. The stakes are very, very high there. Let's move on to Monday in that Prime Ministerial diary. Jeremy Hunt then due as Chancellor to deliver a much-anticipated statement on the government's tax and spending plans. And then if we look ahead to November the 3rd, well then that's a crunch day. The Bank of England will be announcing its latest decision on interest rates. And with rising inflation and the cost of budget food rising even more rapidly, our economics editor Faisal Islam considers the economic prospects.
The ladies are going to do you a food parcel.
The new Prime Minister says in Downing Street the economy is in crisis. For many millions of people, that's a recognition of reality in their street, most notably seen in the food charities in every community like this one in Shildon, County Durham.
Food is a basic essential of life. It's not right that people are hungry and don't have food. That is not right.
Such has been the rise in prices that the Statistics Office is now measuring everyday inflation affecting household purchases. At 17%, it's much higher than the official rate. There have been some phenomenal rises in the prices of basic foods over the past year, driven by the war in Ukraine, weaker sterling and other factors. Pasta is up just under 60% in price. Tea is up 46%. Meanwhile, chips cost 38% more, and that most basic of foodstuffs, bread, is up by a similar number too. Chicken breasts were up 10% over the year. Orange juice, though, was down in price, just under 9%. Elsewhere in County Durham, a manufacturer of washing machines, EBAC, regularly visited by former PM Boris Johnson, expressed the need for a thorough clean-up of recent messes made in Westminster.
The chaos in Westminster now will pass. It might take 6 months, it might take longer, but it will pass. And in some ways, we've probably got to get worse before we get better. You've got to increase taxes. We've all got to pay more. And the people earning more have got to pay more. We've all got to accept we're in a problem. We're in a deep problem with cash shortage. We've got to all make sacrifices. We've got to work more and pay more taxes.
And the challenge for the new neighbours at number 10 and number 11 is that not everybody will be so accepting of such sacrifice to fix a problem they admit is partly of their party's making. Stability, financial credibility and the trust of the markets. These are essential and priceless commodities for any Downing Street team. And the early signs from the currency markets and the borrowing markets are that Mr Sunak and Mr Hunt are winning them back. And that should limit the rise in borrowing costs for mortgages and for businesses. But the cost is a set of tough decisions on tax rises and spending cuts required within days. British financial markets are no longer spinning out of control. But the new PM's task now is to limit the real economic damage to businesses and to households. Faisal Islam, BBC News.
Well, tonight, within the past hour, Downing Street has confirmed that Mr Sunak has spoken by phone to the First Ministers of Scotland and Wales, respectively Nicola Sturgeon and Mark Drakeford, something his predecessor Liz Truss didn't do in her 49 days in office. Mr Sunak is being urged to improve relations with the devolved administrations, including, of course, in Northern Ireland, where the deadline is fast approaching for new elections to break the political deadlock there. We have the latest now from Linlithgow, from Porthcawl and from Belfast, where we start with Chris Page.
He was supposedly knocked out, but he's come off the ropes to be crowned Tory champion. This mural in Belfast has been repainted repeatedly as the political prize fighting in London has played out. In a student area nearby, people have various thoughts on the new Prime Minister and how he got the job.
There's nothing democratic about that. I feel like they need to call a general election ASAP.
To be honest, it's better than Liz Truss anyway. You know.
What would you like him to prioritise for this part of the world?
Just mainly stabilise the economy, to be honest.
There's a really bad drug epidemic at the minute and it probably needs prioritised over majority of things.
And the most immediate issue for Rishi Sunak here is the current absence of the devolved government. The Democratic Unionist Party says it'll block the formation of a power-sharing coalition until the Brexit trade border with the rest of the UK is removed. This Friday is the legal deadline for a devolved government to be formed, following the election to the Northern Ireland Assembly back in May, when Sinn Féin became the first Irish nationalist party ever to win the most seats. There's next to no chance that local ministers will be moving into their offices in Stormont this week. The Northern Ireland Secretary, Chris Heaton-Harris, has retained his post in the cabinet reshuffle. He's planning to call another Assembly election, probably for the 15th of December.
200 years ago, the Union Canal brought trade and prosperity here to Linlithgow. These days, the economic outlook is not nearly so bright. So is Rishi Sunak the leader to turn things around?
Well, still to be proven, let's say. Still to be proven, but I'm hopeful.
What about yourself?
I think he's been Chancellor, he understands what it's about, and I think he'll dismantle a lot of what Truss did that caused all the problems. We have to be serious. We can't live in borrowed money forever. So yes, let's expect cuts in the public service.
Well, I'm not a fan of the Tories in general, but I probably would say he would be my favourite option out of all the ones that possibly were going to stand.
If you were him, what would be the first thing you would do?
I would invest in social care.
I'm one of these people that are for a Scottish referendum. Sorry, but I am. I just think we need it. I never wanted Brexit either. And I'm sure he'll make a good job as a Prime Minister, but I trust our wee Nicola Sturgeon, you know. I love her.
The issue of independence is never far from the surface of politics in Scotland. For some voters, it is the #1 priority. But even so, right now, almost everyone wants to know exactly what Rishi Sunak is going to do about what he calls a profound economic crisis.
What can a new PM do for the people of Porthcawl? Can he quell the storm many here feel is rising? At his Café Mehmet counts empty tables. Customers are cutting back, inflation eating up his income. He hopes Rishi Sunak will help and, as in the pandemic, encourage people to eat out to help out.
Maybe a little business like us, they can get some support from the government, maybe tax-free or VAT can be looked into it.
Annette and Alice are mother and daughter. Neither's convinced that voters in Wales will relate to Mr Sunak or that he can relate to them.
I honestly can't see how someone with that wealth can ever really comprehend what
life is like here.
Life is like here, yeah.
I think more people should be taking to the streets, to be honest, to demand for a general election, because the general people didn't vote him in.
And this doesn't solve it for you, having Rishi Sunak as Prime Minister?
No.
In the last general election, the Tories took the seat from Labour, buoyed by a swell of support for Boris Johnson and promises of getting Brexit done. Over the last 3 years, so much of that has drained away, not just in this seat, but right around Wales.
To stop his party being wiped off the map in Wales, Mr Sunak must somehow turn that tide.
That was Howell Griffith finishing that series of reports there by our correspondents around the UK. Now, in the past few moments, the US President has called Mr Sunak to offer his congratulations. Mr Biden said that he looked forward to the two leaders working successfully together. Mr Sunak has also been speaking with Ukraine's President Zelensky this evening. The Prime Minister comes to office facing a series of major challenges on the global stage, from that war in Ukraine to the global energy crisis. Our diplomatic correspondent James Landale explains what lies ahead.
We've got breaking news on who will be Britain's new Prime Minister. Rishi Sunak is the name.
He may be Britain's 5th Prime Minister in 6 years, but Rishi Sunak's arrival in Downing Street still made headlines. World leaders offered their congratulations, even if they didn't quite get his name right.
Rishi Sunak is now the Prime Minister. Pretty astounding. A groundbreaking milestone, and it matters. It matters.
And not just in America.
History has been scripted in Britain as Rishi Sunak.
The fact that Mr Sunak is a British Asian resonated around the world, especially in India, where the Prime Minister, Narendra Modi, spoke of the living bridge of UK Indians that he hoped could transform historic ties into a modern partnership with Britain. But Mr Sunak takes office while a war rages in Europe. And for all the warm welcome, many leaders just want to know his policy on this and other international challenges. The Prime Minister may struggle to be as popular in Kyiv as Boris Johnson, but he's made clear he will reinforce Britain's total support for Ukraine. In a tweet, President Zelensky congratulated Mr Sunak and said he was ready to continue strengthening the strategic partnership between Ukraine and Britain. But supporting Ukraine in the long run will cost money, largely from the coffers of the Ministry of Defence. And on this, Mr Sunak's plans are less clear. Liz Truss promised to spend 3% of national wealth on defence. That's a huge increase, as much as £100 billion a year. Mr Sunak dismissed that as an arbitrary target. The Prime Minister will also have to deal with China, which recently launched missiles into the sea near Taiwan. He says China is a long-term threat to Britain, but it's also a trading partner, so getting the balance right won't be easy. And then there's Europe. Mr Sunak campaigned as a committed Brexiteer, but some in the EU are hoping he'll adopt a more pragmatic approach on energy prices and trade disputes left over from Brexit. Ultimately, what many foreign leaders want to know is whether Mr Sunak can give Britain the political stability his predecessors have not. James Landale, BBC News.
Just a reminder, there are more updates, plenty of news and analysis from James Landale, Chris Mason and others on BBC News Online, bbc.co.uk/news, and of course you can find it on the BBC News app. Let's turn to some of the day's other news. 5 Palestinians, including at least 3 gunmen, have been killed in a major Israeli raid against a militant group in the occupied West Bank. The Israelis carried out the raid in the city of Nablus and claimed that they were acting against militants who have been carrying out attacks on Israeli soldiers and civilians. Palestinians say it's one of the biggest Israeli offensives in more than a decade. From Nablus, our Middle East correspondent, Tom Bateman, sent this report on the latest violence.
Israel's special forces move in after midnight. They say they've come to target the leader of the Lion's Den, a rising Palestinian militant group. Palestinians use loudspeakers for a call to defend the city, and many answer. Gunfights break out between militants and Israeli troops. Israel's search and arrest raids in the occupied West Bank have been mounting for months, and this was one of the biggest in years, killing 5, including the militant commander. With the strike now closing shops, people emerged to streets cleared of trade, but full of the talk of death. The Lion's Den rejects the traditional Palestinian leadership and has rapidly grown a popular base. Israel says this was the group's bomb factory.
The windows.
Rayek lives next door and told me he was blown out of bed by the missile strike. I saw it come in. All this glass fell on us, he says. The building exploded. We took the kids and we ran downstairs.
The big fear now is of a much further collapse into violence, and that is because you have a new generation of militants prepared, willing to fire at the Israelis during these raids, and the Israelis using a level of force here that hasn't been seen in the West Bank in years.
At the funerals, there are calls to resist. Israel says it's responding to a deadly wave of attacks by Palestinians. Mohammed escaped death in the strike that killed his militant brother. Some here mourning say it adds to the group's appeal. For every one who dies, this boy tells me, there'll be 10 more ready to fight. Israel says it will keep striking hard to counter the threat. But the queues of mourners are growing, and so too the grip of militancy. Tom Bateman, BBC News, Nablus.
Let's have a brief look at some of the day's other stories now. Ukraine has urged citizens who are abroad not to return until the spring to help ease the pressure on the severely damaged energy system. The announcement was made as President Zelensky said that Russian airstrikes had destroyed more than a third of the country's energy sector. 2 men have died and a third is critically ill in hospital after a shooting in East London this morning. Police were called to reports of a fight and of shots being fired in Ilford just after midnight. No arrests have been made so far. So, some more on the main story as we near the end of the programme tonight, the appointment of Rishi Sunak as Prime Minister. A quick look at some of the other cabinet appointments today in some very important areas. Ben Wallace there, the man who's staying as Defence Secretary. Gillian Keegan, who is actually a new addition to the Education Department as Education Secretary. And Steve Barclay, who's been in Cabinet in various jobs, is now the Health and Social Care Secretary. Let's go back to Chris Mason in Downing Street. And we were going through the timetable earlier, Chris, and looking ahead to that big fiscal statement next Monday. Is it fair to say that that is the next big event for Rishi Sunak's government?
It is. I mean, today was a day inevitably with a fair splash of constitutional ritual, but very quickly you get the roaring return of politics, and we've seen that with the assembly of the cabinet and the arguments that have already broken out over that. We've seen an attempt by the new Prime Minister to set a new tone, I think illustrated tonight with the news that he has spoken to the First Ministers of Scotland and Wales. Pointedly, his predecessor didn't manage that in her entire time in office. So he's trying to reset, if you like, the latest attempt at Conservative renewal in office. But straight away come the big moments, not least that economic statement on Monday. The Chancellor Jeremy Hunt has been speaking to departments. He'll have new Secretaries of State to speak to now, trying to work out where savings, where cuts might be able to come. There's the other side of the ledger as well, potential tax rises. They are politically difficult things to do for a new Prime Minister just days in office, but there's a bigger point that is more important than it being politically difficult. They will pose big challenges as well in the wider country. So straight away, Rishi Sunak into very, very difficult governing decisions. There is absolutely no chance of a honeymoon, but then he'll know that because he'll look back at how his predecessor fared and just hope things can be better for him.
All right, Chris, many thanks again. Chris Mason with the last word there at Downing Street tonight, our political editor. Time is 34 minutes past 10. Let's have a look at the weather. Hi, Nick.
Hi, meteorology taking a back seat today, not to politics, to astronomy, because if you missed it, here it is. It's a partial solar eclipse this morning. If you did miss it, the next one is due in 2025. It was a relatively quiet weather day today. Things are turning busier now, though. It's a windier night out there, as it will be for the rest of the week, and they'll come with rain at times and all the time, and the very mild theme to this weather does continue. Now, we've got low pressure sitting to the west of us. That's pushing in more rain across western areas of the UK at the moment. A lot of that will clear away quickly in the morning to a day of sunshine and blustery showers. And if anything, temperatures head up a couple of degrees over the next couple of days. We are drawing the air into the UK from a long way south of us. That's why temperatures are so high compared to what we might expect. The rain, that's quite heavy tonight through parts of Wales, northwest England, Northern Ireland as it moves into Scotland. Coastal gales in the west and what will be another mild night out there. Double figures for most of us as we start the day tomorrow. A wet start across much of Scotland, that rain clearing through the Northern Isles. Another band of showers from Northern Ireland through Wales and Scotland, but weakening as it moves further east across England. And a lot of that is out of the way for the afternoon to allow quite a bit of sunshine, the odd heavy, blustery and possibly thundery shower too. And if you're out of the breeze and in some sunshine, there's some warmth. Talking of the wind, gusts higher than this around the Western Isles, 50 miles an hour or so. But temperatures, I mean, there'll be some spots in southern and eastern England for the next few days that are 20 at least. Largely fine for Wednesday evening. Overnight into Thursday, we do start to bring more cloud into England and Wales, which will have some rain that clears away on Thursday, and then a more vigorous weather system moves in overnight and into Friday. Another spell of rain, but a lot of that clears away quite quickly on Friday morning. So rain at times, not all the time, Thursday and Friday. Look at these temperatures though. Every month so far this year has been warmer than average. October doing nothing to halt that trend. Huw.
Nick, many thanks once again. That's BBC News at 10 on Tuesday, October the 25th. More analysis of the day's events at Westminster and the new Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak. That's on Newsnight, just getting underway with Victoria Derbyshire on BBC Two. Here on BBC One, of course, the news continues with all of our colleagues across the nations and regions standing by with the news where you are. But from all of us on the 10 team, thanks for watching and good night.